31 people in that boardroom, and not one of them had actually read the licensing agreement. I remember thinking that as I sat there watching the new CLO, my brother-in-law had brought him in 8 months earlier, slide a termination letter across the table like he was dealing cards. Confident. Almost bored. The kind of man who mistakes a spreadsheet for understanding. "We appreciate everything you've built here, Callum," he said. His name was Fletcher. Rodney Fletcher. He'd spent 12 years in telecom before landing at MedRoute Technologies, which meant he understood contracts, quarterly targets, and exactly nothing about medical routing algorithms. I looked at the letter. I looked at him. I looked at the 14 other faces around that table, most of them avoiding my eyes. "Appreciated," I said. I folded the letter in half, tucked it into my jacket pocket, stood up, and walked out. That was a Tuesday in late October. The maple out front of the MedRoute building had already dropped half its leaves. I remember stepping on them in the parking lot, hearing them crunch under my boots and thinking, 30 days. Give it 30 days. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context. I'm 53 years old. I grew up in Waterloo, Ontario, studied computer science at the University of Waterloo, back when the co-op program actually meant something, and spent the first decade of my career doing contract work for health tech startups across the Golden Horseshoe. Small companies, tight budgets, interesting problems. The kind of work where you wear 6 hats and nobody checks whether you're billing for the overtime. In 2009, I joined a 3-person company called MedRoute. Back then it wasn't called that. It was called PathSync, and it had one product, a routing optimization tool for paramedic dispatch. Basic stuff. It worked, but only barely, and only for mid-sized municipalities. The founders, 2 brothers from Hamilton, had the vision but not the technical architecture to scale it. I rewrote the core algorithm from scratch over 14 months. I mean that literally. I came in every morning at 6. I left at 9 at night. I ate dinner at my desk more times than I ate it at home, and I rebuilt the routing logic into something that could handle real-time multi-variable decisions at a provincial scale. We called it the AdaptRoute engine. Here's the part that matters, and I want to be precise about this, because it confused people later. I built AdaptRoute on my own time, using my own equipment, and I registered the intellectual property in my own name in 2011. Not because I was planning something, not because I was protecting myself. I did it because that's what the lawyers at the Communitech Startup Accelerator told every developer in the room to do. "If you're building something on your own hours," the speaker said, "register it yourself." So I did. MedRoute licensed AdaptRoute for me. Annual licensing fee renewable every 3 years. We had a gentleman's agreement for years, barely formalized, because the 2 brothers trusted me and I trusted them. When the company scaled up and brought in outside investors around 2016, we finally put it in writing properly. My lawyer, a woman named Brenda who worked out of a small office in Kitchener, made sure every clause was airtight. The license was non-transferable without my written consent. Termination of my employment had no bearing on the licensing agreement whatsoever. The investors either never read that clause or assumed it would never matter. That was their mistake. The brothers sold MedRoute to a private equity group out of Toronto in 2020. I stayed on. The product worked, the team was good, and the new ownership mostly left us alone for the first 2 years. Then they brought in Rodney Fletcher. Rodney's mandate, as he explained it in his first all-hands meeting, was to modernize the operational architecture. What that meant in practice was cutting anyone who couldn't justify their salary in a 1-page summary. He had the energy of someone who'd watched too many turnaround documentaries and not enough of the actual operations he was supposed to be optimizing. My team and I built him that 1-page summary. We built him a 40-page technical document. We walked him through the AdaptRoute engine, the dispatch integration layer, the predictive load balancing module we'd been developing for 18 months. He nodded through all of it, with the expression of a man waiting for the meeting to end. "This is legacy infrastructure," he told the board 3 months later. "I found out through my deputy, a young engineer named Soraya, who'd been with me for 6 years and had excellent instincts for office politics. Rodney had told the board that the core technology was mature and replaceable, that the real value was in the customer contracts, and that a leaner team could maintain the product going forward while a third-party vendor handled future development. I requested a meeting with him directly. He gave me 20 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon and spent 12 of them on his phone. Callum, he said, not looking up, I appreciate the passion, but the company needs to evolve. 2 weeks later, the boardroom. The termination letter. Appreciated. I drove home on the 401 with the window cracked, November air coming in cold and sharp, and I called Brenda from the car. They just let me go, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the MedRoute license. Still in my name? They know that? I genuinely don't think they do. Another pause. Callum, don't say anything to anyone yet. Come into the office tomorrow morning. Bring every piece of paper you have. I pulled off at a Tim Hortons on the way home and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes drinking a medium double-double and watching the traffic on the overpass. I wasn't angry. That surprised me a little. What I felt was closer to something like clarity, the kind you get when you've been carrying a weight for so long you forgot what it felt like to put it down. My wife met me at the door. She took one look in my face and said, "What happened?" They let me go. She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't panic. She put her hand on my arm and said, "Come inside. I'll make dinner." We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours that night. I explained the situation, the license, the IP, what it meant legally. She listened carefully. She'd worked in HR for most of her career and had a very clear head about contracts and liability. So they're running their entire platform on technology they don't actually own, she said. Correct. She was quiet for a moment. And the license renews when? February, 3 months away. And renewal requires your signature. It requires my written consent, yes. She got up, refilled her tea, and sat back down. So what do you want to do? That was the question, wasn't it? I spent the first week doing nothing dramatic. I went into Brenda's office. We reviewed every document. We confirmed what I already knew. The IP was clean. The license was valid. The termination clause had zero bearing on the licensing agreement. Brenda had a colleague who specialized in IP litigation review, and she brought him in as a second set of eyes. He spent 4 hours going through everything and came out of the meeting looking almost amused. Whoever approved this employment termination without reviewing the IP licensing position, he said, made a very expensive assumption. In the meantime, I'd been having coffee with someone I'd known for years, a man I'll call my old contact at Northvale Health Systems, because I want to be a little careful here. Northvale was MedRoute's largest direct competitor in Canada. They operated primarily in British Columbia and Alberta, had been trying to expand into Ontario for 3 years, and had been repeatedly blocked because MedRoute had the superior routing architecture. That architecture was MedRoute routing architecture. That architecture was MedRoute. My old contact called me 2 days after the termination became public. The health tech community in Canada is not large. Word travels. I heard, he said. Are you doing anything right now? Having coffee, I said. Why? Because I think we should have lunch. We had lunch at a quiet Italian place in Mississauga. He brought their chief technology officer, a sharp woman who asked technical questions for 45 minutes straight and clearly understood every answer. He brought their legal counsel. I brought Brenda. I want to be clear about something. I didn't go into that lunch planning to sell. I went to understand what the market looked like. There's a difference, and I think it mattered for how the conversation developed. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't angry. I was simply a man with a very valuable piece of intellectual property and no particular obligation to the people who'd just shown me the door. The CTO asked me about the predictive load balancing module, the one my team had been building for the past 18 months, the one Rodney had never bothered to understand. It's not public yet, I said. Does MedRoute know about it? They know it's in development. They don't know the architecture. She looked at her notes. She looked at my old contact. Something passed between them. Can you walk us through it? She asked. I did. I had my laptop. I walked him through the entire architecture, the performance benchmarks, the provincial deployment model. The CTO stopped taking notes about halfway through and just listened. After I finished, there was about 30 seconds of silence. What would it take, my old contact said carefully, to license this to us? That depends, I said, on what you're actually asking for. Brenda put her hand lightly on the table. That was our signal that it was time to stop talking and start listening. There were 3 more meetings over the next 2 weeks. Northvale brought in their full legal team for the second meeting. For the third, they brought in their CEO, who flew in from Vancouver. He was a direct man, older than I expected, and he got to the point within 10 minutes. "We want an exclusive license," he said. "North American scope, full deployment rights for AdaptRoute and the load balancing module." "You understand what that means for your Ontario expansion," I said. "That's exactly why we want it." We talked numbers. I won't pretend I didn't feel something in that conversation. A kind of low, steady satisfaction that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the fact that I'd spent 14 years building something real, and here were people who actually understood what it was worth. The final offer was structured carefully. A lump sum for the exclusive license transfer plus a guaranteed annual royalty for 7 years, plus an option for me to consult on deployment at a day rate that would have made Rodney Fletcher's eye twitch. Brenda and I took 4 days to review everything. We had 2 additional lawyers look at it. We pushed back on 3 clauses and got movement on 2 of them. I signed on a Friday afternoon in late November, 31 days after the termination letter. Brenda walked me to my car afterward. It was cold, proper Canadian cold, the kind that gets into your coat by 6 o'clock. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Fine," I said, and I meant it. The news reached MedRoute, as best I can piece together, about 10 days later. The licensing agreement was filed with the appropriate registries. That's a matter of public record. And someone on Northvale's team issued a press release about their Ontario expansion strategy that mentioned the new technology partnership. I was at my daughter's place in Guelph having dinner when my phone started going. First, it was a number I didn't recognize. Turns out it was someone from MedRoute's board. Then it was an email from their legal team. Then, about 40 minutes later, a call from Rodney Fletcher himself. I let it go to voicemail. His message was not short. I'll say that. It covered, in roughly this order, surprise, confusion, some technical misunderstanding about what the IP licensing agreement actually meant, an implication that I had behaved unethically, and finally, near the end, when I think the reality of the situation was starting to land, something that was almost a question, almost a request. The tone shift in the last 30 seconds was something I'll remember for a long time. I didn't call back that night. My daughter asked me what all the phone calls were about. I gave her the short version. She's 28, works in project management, has her mother's clear head about these things. "So they fired you, and then discovered you owned the thing they were selling," she said. "Essentially." She thought about it for a moment. "Did you know when they fired you that this would happen?" I knew what the license said. "That's not what I asked." I smiled. She's always been like that, cutting straight to the actual question. "I didn't know for certain," I said, but I wasn't surprised. Over the following weeks, the situation at MedRoute deteriorated faster than I'd expected. Without a valid license for AdaptRoute, which expired as scheduled in February, and which I had no obligation to renew with them on any terms, their product was legally unusable in its current form. The third-party vendor Rodney had been quietly negotiating with to replace the AdaptRoute engine turned out to have a 6-month minimum development timeline and no guarantee of matching the performance benchmarks their existing clients expected. 3 of MedRoute's largest provincial contracts had performance guarantee clauses. When the technology underpinning those guarantees became unavailable, those clauses became relevant. I heard about the board meeting from someone I won't name. It was not a calm meeting. Fletcher's modernization strategy, the one that had led to my termination as part of a broader legacy infrastructure rationalization, was reviewed in significant detail. The investors who'd approved the strategy without understanding the IP position were, by all accounts, unhappy. Rodney Fletcher's tenure in MedRoute ended in March. I didn't feel triumphant about that specifically. I want to be honest about this. I'm not someone who wanted to see people hurt. The company had good employees, people I'd worked with for years, some of them genuinely talented, and the disruption was real for them. That part wasn't satisfying. What was satisfying was something quieter. It was the knowledge that the thing I'd built, the thing that had been called legacy and mature and replaceable, turned out to be the load-bearing wall that the whole structure depended on. You don't know what a load-bearing wall is until someone decides to remove it. I want to talk about the team for a moment because this is the part that matters most to me. In the 2 weeks between my termination and the Northvale deal being finalized, I'd had quiet conversations with 6 people from my group at MedRoute: Soraya, my deputy, 2 senior engineers, a data architect who'd been with me for 4 years, a QA lead, a technical writer who understood the product better than most engineers I've worked with. I didn't recruit them. I want to be clear about that. I told each of them individually that I was working on something new and that if they found themselves looking for a change in the next few months, they should call me. I gave no details. I made no promises. All 6 of them called within 60 days. By spring, we were incorporated. The new company is based in Waterloo, full circle for me. We have a services agreement with Northvale that keeps us busy, but we're also building the next iteration of the load balancing module, which is going to do things that I genuinely think will change how emergency medical dispatch works in this country. I don't say that lightly. I've been in this field for 20 years. I know what the current systems can't do. Soraya runs the technical operations side. She's 34 and better at the people management than I was at her age by a significant margin. The 2 senior engineers handle architecture. The data architect is doing work that makes me feel honestly a little obsolete, which is exactly the feeling you want from someone on your team. We have 17 people now. We'll probably double that in the next 18 months. My brother-in-law, my wife's younger brother, who had been the one to recommend Rodney Fletcher for the COO position in the first place, called me in April. It was a Sunday afternoon, which told me it wasn't a professional call. We have always had a cordial relationship, not close. He moves in finance circles, I move in tech circles, and our overlap mostly happens at Christmas and the occasional summer weekend at the cottage. He'd never shown much interest in what I actually built for a living. I heard things have been difficult at MedRoute, he said. I heard the same, I said. A pause. I didn't know about the IP arrangement, Callum. I want you to know that. I believe you, I said, and I did. He's not a technical person. He wouldn't have known to ask. I recommended Fletcher because his operational track record was strong, he said. I didn't anticipate. Nobody anticipated it because nobody read the agreement, I said, not unkindly. That's not your fault. Another pause. How are you doing, really? Better than I've been in a long time, I said. That was true. My wife and I had dinner with him and her sister the following month, and the evening was fine. A little awkward in the early part, easier by dessert. We didn't talk about MedRoute. There's a version of this story where I'm the hero who outmaneuvered the villain, and I understand why people tell it that way. It's a satisfying shape. But the truth is messier and, I think, more interesting. I didn't outmaneuver anyone. I just built something real, documented my ownership properly, hired a good lawyer, and trusted that the paperwork I'd filed in 2011 meant what it said. The dramatic part, the part that feels like strategy, was mostly just the natural consequence of other people not doing their due diligence. What I did choose, consciously, was the word appreciated. I chose not to argue, not to negotiate in that boardroom, not to give anyone a preview of what was coming, not out of calculation, or not entirely. Mostly because I was 53 years old and I had spent enough years watching people who didn't understand a system try to dismantle it. And I didn't have the energy anymore to explain myself to someone who wasn't listening. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is the one word that ends the conversation. The maple out front of the Northvale building in Mississauga is just starting to bud now. I walked past it last week on my way to a meeting, and I thought about the leaves crunching in the MedRoute parking lot back in October, and about how strange it is that 6 months can contain so much. My daughter called on the weekend. She's thinking about leaving her current position and asked what I thought about startups. Call me when you're ready, I said. I know a few people. The maple outside the Northvale building was just starting to bud when I walked past it last week, and I thought about how different it looked from the one in the MedRoute parking lot back in October, the one dropping leaves the morning they handed me that letter. 6 months. It's strange how much can change in 6 months, and how little actually has to go wrong for everything to unravel when the foundation was never solid to begin with. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the money, that came later, and it came cleanly, but it wasn't the thing. What made the difference was something I'd been building long before Fletcher walked into that boardroom, a habit of doing the work properly, Registering the IP in 2011 wasn't clever strategy. It was just the right thing to do, and I did it because someone with more experience than me said it mattered. I listened. I filed the paperwork. I hired Brenda and I took her advice seriously for 14 years. There's nothing dramatic about any of that. It's just integrity applied consistently over time. And it turns out that compound interest works on character the same way it works on everything else. Soraya called me last week to go over the new deployment specs. She's sharper than I was at her age by a considerable margin, and watching her run the technical operations side of the new company. Watching her catch things I would have missed, push back when she's right, trust her instincts. That's the thing I'm most proud of from all of this. Not the deal. Her. The two senior engineers. The data architect doing work that makes me feel obsolete in the best possible way. These are people who stayed because the work was real, and they knew it, and they bet on it when they didn't have to. Fletcher had the title in the boardroom and 14 executives nodding along with him. What he didn't have was the patience to actually understand what he was supposed to be managing. That's not a character flaw I'm judging. It's a gap in judgment that had consequences. He moved fast, he moved confidently, and he never once slowed down long enough to ask what he didn't know. The thing about that kind of confidence is that it works right up until it doesn't. And when it stops working, it stops all at once. I spent 14 years building something that worked. I documented it. I protected it legally. I hired people smarter than me in the areas where I needed them. I kept showing up when the work was hard and unrewarding, and nobody was paying particular attention. That's not a strategy. It's just persistence applied with some sense of direction. The quiet kind that doesn't make for good boardroom theater, but tends to outlast the people who do. My daughter asked me if I knew it would end this way when I said appreciated and walked out. I told her I didn't know for certain. That was honest. What I knew was that I'd done the work, I'd done it right, and I'd documented everything properly. After that, the outcome had a logic of its own. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how carefully you build, how honestly you deal with people, and whether you have the steadiness to wait while things unfold at their own pace. The rest, it turns out, tends to take care of itself.